Most people know the 12 tribes of Israel, the sons of Jacob. But few ever pause to ask, what of the firstborn of Abraham? What of Ishmael, the son of Hagar? In the shadows of sacred history, his story has been pushed aside, his children dismissed as strangers. Yet the scriptures themselves declare that Ishmael, too, would father 12 tribes, princes destined to shape nations. To forget them is to close one eye while gazing at the mirror of history. And so, tonight, let us lift that veil and look upon the hidden sons of Abraham. I speak to you now as one who has seen through the veil of time, and I tell you this, the story of Ishmael and his 12 tribes is not a forgotten shadow. It is a living thread that runs through the fabric of your present, and if you overlook it, you blind yourself to half the truth of Abraham's house. Many know the 12 tribes of Israel, sons of Jacob, their names recited in prayers and etched upon the scrolls of sacred memory, yet few ask of Ishmael, the firstborn of Abraham, the son born to Hagar in the wilderness, the boy whose very name means God will hear. Do you not find it strange that so many speak of chosen lines and promises, yet pass in silence over the one to whom God himself gave a promise, that he too would father 12 princes, that his seed would not vanish but would become a great nation? This silence is not by accident, it is by neglect, and in that neglect lies a wound of history, one that echoes in the struggles of your age. When I rest and the currents of vision carry me, I see Abraham torn between 2 sons, Isaac and Ishmael, 2 lines, 2 destinies, one born of Sarah, the other of Hagar, yet both drawn from the same father's breath. Isaac carried the covenant remembered by Israel, but Ishmael carried another covenant, one too easily dismissed by those who write history with narrow pens. The eternal is not bound by your partialities. When Hagar fled into the desert with her child and the waters were gone, it was not Israel that God heard, it was Ishmael. God has heard the voice of the lad where he is, said the angel, and that word was not mere comfort, it was prophecy. In that moment the heavens declared that Ishmael, though cast aside by men, was not cast aside by God. This is the first lesson, that divine hearing is not limited to the chosen few, but extends to those you abandon, those you scorn, those you do not count. As I looked deeper, I saw that Ishmael's life is not simply the story of rivalry between brothers, but the story of humanity itself. For who among you has not felt like an outcast, born outside the circle of approval, yearning for recognition, who has not carried within them the cry of Ishmael, "Does God hear me too?" And the answer comes across the ages. Yes, God hears. For Ishmael was promised 12 princes, tribes that would spread across the desert sands, shaping nations, building routes of trade, living under the stars, surviving where others could not. These are not forgotten phantoms of Scripture. They are fathers of peoples, roots of cultures still alive today. It is true that the world remembers Israel's tribes more readily, for their story fills the pages of the Bible and echoes in the churches and synagogues. But Ishmael's sons walk a path just as real, and their story runs like an underground river, feeding civilizations unseen by the casual eye. Arabia, the Sinai, the Levant, even the far edges of Africa all bore the imprint of Ishmael's seed. You call them Arabs, you call them nomads, you call them tribes, but I tell you, they are Abraham's blood no less than Israel, and their story is part of the covenant of mankind. Do not think that rivalry erased blessing. Rivalry is but the stage upon which the greater plan unfolds. Isaac's line gave the law, the order, the temple, but Ishmael's line gave the wilderness, the endurance, the call that rises from tents beneath the moon. One carries the written word, the other the unbroken spirit. Together they form the balance of Abraham's legacy, and to sever one from the other is to cripple the vision of what God intended. I have seen how men make war in the name of these brothers, forgetting that they are bound by one father. The sons of Isaac claim supremacy, the sons of Ishmael claim survival, and between them the desert burns. Yet when you look with the eye of the Spirit, you see not enemies, but twins divided by pride. If reconciliation is ever to come, it will come by remembering this, that Ishmael was heard, and his 12 tribes matter not as a footnote, but as part of the living covenant. Hear me then, for this is no idle history lesson. To study Ishmael is to study yourself. the part of you that feels rejected, the part of you that believes blessing belongs only to others, the part of you that wanders in the desert thinking you are unseen. That is Ishmael within you. And the promise given to him is a promise given to that part of you God will hear. The 12 princes are not only tribes in the sand, they are symbols of the manifold ways. Blessing multiplies when rejection is overcome by endurance. I tell you again without hesitation, the story of Ishmael is not only the story of a boy born into rivalry, but the revelation of how division itself was woven into the fabric of Abraham's household. For in this division lies the key to understanding both the promise and the conflict that has shaped the destiny of nations, and I must unfold it for you in detail so you may see what the Spirit showed me. Abraham longed with all his heart for a son, for his life was marked by a covenant with God, a promise that his seed would be as numerous as the stars. Yet his tent grew old and Sarah remained barren. So in desperation Sarah gave to him her servant Hagar, an Egyptian handmaid. And in this act the first division entered, not because Abraham did wrong in seeking a son, but because the promise was not to be fulfilled by man's calculation, but by divine timing. Nevertheless, Ishmael was conceived, and when Hagar carried him in her womb, she despised her mistress, and Sarah afflicted her until she fled into the desert. And there by the spring the angel appeared and declared that she would bear a son, and his name would be Ishmael, for God had heard her affliction. This moment is more than a family quarrel. It is a revelation that even in affliction, even in exile, the cry of the rejected is not silenced, and the child born of this sorrow carried within him a destiny that no rejection could erase. I saw in the visions how Abraham's tent became a place of quiet conflict, for though Ishmael was loved by his father, Sarah's eyes burned with jealousy. And when Isaac was finally born by miracle, the rivalry hardened into stone. Here is the second division, for Isaac, the son of promise, was seen as the true heir, while Ishmael, the firstborn, was cast out, though he too bore the blood of Abraham. Many read this as though Ishmael's place were only a mistake, but the Spirit declares otherwise. The Eternal does not waste blood, nor does he erase covenants lightly, and what men call error is often the beginning of a wider design. Ishmael grew in strength, and Abraham loved him. Yet the day came when Sarah demanded that both Hagar and her son be sent away, and Abraham's heart was torn in two, for a father's love cannot choose between sons without agony. But God spoke and told him to listen to Sarah, for Isaac was the chosen seed through which the covenant of Israel would come. Yet he also declared that Ishmael would be made a great nation, for he too was Abraham's seed. Here you must see the paradox. God himself commanded the division, yet in commanding it he also blessed both sides of it, setting the stage for a destiny in which two lines would grow, two streams flowing from one spring, destined at times to clash, at times to converge, yet never to be wholly separated. I looked into the records of the soul, and saw that when Hagar wandered with Ishmael in the desert and the waters were gone, her heart broke, and she set the child under a bush and turned her face away, unwilling to watch him die. Yet again the angel called to her, saying that God had heard the voice of the lad, and her eyes were opened to a well of water, and the boy lived and grew and became an archer, and his mother took for him a wife from Egypt. Do you not see the symbolism? The rejected one was sustained by unseen wells, the outcast drank from hidden waters, and the boy condemned by men was preserved by heaven itself. For his destiny was not to vanish, but to expand into tribes that would shape the lands of Arabia. Thus the division was not the end, but the beginning of two great lines, one destined to write law upon stone tablets, the other destined to carve survival upon the sands of the desert. I tell you this with sharpness, because many have misread the division as curse, when in truth it was dual blessing, one of covenant and order, the other of endurance and freedom. The son of Sarah would build nations of priests and prophets. The son of Hagar would build nations of traders, warriors, and seekers of wells in wastelands. Both reveal aspects of the divine will, For the Eternal speaks not only through temples, but also through tents, not only through the law of one people, but through the survival of many. When I beheld Abraham's household in vision, I saw the anguish of a man torn between promises. Yet I also saw that the Eternal Father above him knew the balance of the design, and that one son would stand for the rooted covenant, the other for the wandering inheritance, and both would mirror back to the world the paradox of divine choice. What men call division is often preparation. What men call rivalry is often the sharpening of destiny. And what men call rejection is often the prelude to expansion. Ishmael's exile was not the end of his blessing, but the necessary path by which his tribes would scatter far and wide, beyond the shadow of Isaac, into lands where new nations would be born. That is why you must not read this story as if Ishmael were an accident, for there are no accidents in the records of God, only purposes that unfold in time. The division of Abraham's house was not the failure of covenant, but the multiplication of it. And in that multiplication lies the seed of both conflict and fulfillment that shapes your world to this day. So I say to you, study Ishmael with the same seriousness as you study Isaac, for both reveal the hand of the Eternal, and in their rivalry you see the reflection of humanity's own divided heart, torn between chosen and cast out, between law and wilderness, between inheritance and exile, yet both heard by the same God who does not abandon the cries of any son. This is the second part of the mystery, the birth of division that was not merely a quarrel in one tent, but the setting in motion of two destinies that would echo through all generations. Ishmael's place in the great stream of faith is neither hidden nor marginal. It is central, for his name and his bloodline flow through Judaism, Christianity, and Islam alike, and to forget this truth is to blind yourself to the living unity that lies beneath the surface of division. The record of Israel remembers him as the firstborn of Abraham, the son of Hagar, the boy cast into the wilderness, yet preserved by the voice of God. And though Israel's scribes chose to set Isaac as the heir of covenant, they did not deny that Ishmael too was promised greatness, nor could they erase the fact that Abraham's love held him close until the day Sarah's demand drove him away. In the Christian memory, Ishmael remains not as the chosen line of covenant, but as a witness to divine mercy, a reminder that the God of Abraham hears even those whom men reject. And in the teachings of the early church fathers, there is recognition that Ishmael's destiny fulfilled a parallel path, one that stretched beyond the borders of Israel, but still served the unfolding plan of the Creator. In Islam, however, Ishmael rises to his highest place, for in their tradition he is not the outcast rival of Isaac, but the honored partner of Abraham, the son who stood with his father upon the sands of Arabia to raise the foundations of the Kaaba at Mecca, the holiest shrine, the direction to which millions turn in prayer every day. Here is the paradox. Unveiled, the same figure who is remembered in Jewish tradition as the wild archer, in Christian tradition as the displaced son, is in Islam remembered as the forefather of the Prophet, the ancestor of Muhammad, and thus the root of an entire civilization of faith. This is no accident, for the Eternal allowed the same life to cast three shadows, each perceived differently, each carrying a portion of truth. In my visions, I saw that Ishmael's role is that of bridge, for he is the link between the tents of Isaac and the multitude of Arabia, the living thread between covenant and wilderness, between the law written on tablets and the call proclaimed from desert sands. To the Jew, he is a reminder that God hears even beyond the chosen line. To the Christian, he is a figure of mercy, showing that exile does not erase divine attention. To the Muslim, he is the father of tribes, the builder with Abraham of the sanctuary that still stands as testimony. Three faiths, one man, and yet instead of recognizing the unity, men have often chosen to fight, as though the blessing of one must mean the curse of another, not perceiving that the Eternal does not divide his promises with such poverty. Ishmael's name itself is a prophecy. God will hear. And indeed, across centuries, God has heard him in three voices: heard in Hebrew, heard in Greek, heard in Arabic, heard in synagogues, churches, and mosques, all calling on the same Father, though disputing over the Son. Consider the weight of this, for it means that Ishmael is not a footnote. He is a fulcrum. His story forces you to confront the uncomfortable truth that divine blessing is larger than your tribe, that heaven does not choose only one and erase the other, but works in paradox, exalting both the son of Sarah and the son of Hagar. Men have spilled rivers of blood over this rivalry. Yet in the deeper record, I saw that the Creator never intended the story to end in hatred, but in recognition that both lines sprang from Abraham, that both carry light, that both were destined to testify of the one God. In Judaism, Ishmael's place is uneasy but undeniable. In Christianity, his presence is cautionary but meaningful. In Islam, his role is exalted and foundational. Put these together and you see the truth. Ishmael stands at the center of the Abrahamic circle, binding all three faiths, whether they admit it or not. He is the unacknowledged brother, the inconvenient ancestor, the outcast turned cornerstone, and until humanity accepts his place, the division of faiths will remain a wound. Do not think this is only theology, for the legacy of Ishmael is still alive in the politics, wars, and prayers of your age. Every conflict in the Middle East, every dispute over land and covenant, every cry of Jerusalem, every call of Mecca carries the echo of Ishmael and Isaac, the two brothers whose rivalry became the rivalry of nations. But if you see it rightly, you will also see that the healing of the world lies in remembering both, not exalting one to erase the other, for as long as Ishmael is dismissed, peace will be a mirage. That is why I speak with urgency the three great faiths that claim Abraham cannot deny Ishmael without denying part of themselves. He is not only history, he is the living bond that could remind them of their shared origin. This is why his story matters, why it is dangerous to silence it, why the Spirit compels me to declare it in detail. The Jews trace their identity to Isaac. The Christians inherit the promises through that same line fulfilled in Christ. The Muslims claim Ishmael as the forefather of Muhammad, and each clings to its vision as exclusive. But the records show otherwise, for Abraham was father of both, and the promise was spoken over both. The paradox of Ishmael is that he forces humanity to confront the breadth of divine blessing. You may divide lands, you may write separate scriptures, you may set up boundaries of law, but you cannot erase the truth that Ishmael lives in the center of all your stories. And as long as his name means God will hear, you may be sure that God still hears the voice of the outcast, the cry of the wanderer, the prayer from the desert, as surely as he hears the songs of priests in temples. Thus, the third part of this mystery is not only the history of a man, but the unveiling of a bridge that still stands, though men refuse to cross it, the bridge that connects three faiths and testifies that one God hears them all. When I beheld the visions concerning the sons of Ishmael, I saw not merely names inscribed upon a page of Genesis, but living streams flowing from the firstborn of Abraham, and each name carried a vibration, a prophecy, a destiny, and though men often recite them quickly as though they were forgotten genealogies, the Spirit impressed upon me that every son is a key to understanding how God fulfills promises beyond the sight of men. For it is written in Genesis that God said unto Abraham, As for Ishmael, I have heard thee. Behold, I have blessed him, and will make him fruitful, and will multiply him exceedingly. 12 princes shall he beget, and I will make him a great nation. And the names of these princes are given Nebaioth, Kedar, Adbeel, Mibsam, Mishma, Dumah, Massa, Hadad, Tema, Jetur, Naphish, and Kedemah. Do not pass lightly over them, for the ancients did not speak names idly. Each bore a weight of meaning. Each echoed a spiritual truth, and in their unfolding you see not only history but prophecy. In my trance I saw Nebaioth, the eldest, standing like a tall cedar, the first to carry the strength of his father, and his name, which signifies heights or prophecies, marked him as one who would lay foundations for tribes of shepherds. Indeed, the records of the prophets mention him, for Isaiah speaks of Nebaioth's flocks ministering in the house of the Lord, and historians found traces of his people stretching from the Euphrates to the Red Sea. Then I beheld Kedar, the second son, whose name means dark, not in the sense of curse, but of mystery, the shadow where secrets are kept, and the prophet Isaiah again speaks of the glory of Kedar's flocks and the warriors of his tents, and the Assyrian records speak of his tribes resisting empires with fierce skill. Together Nebaioth and Kedar formed pillars of Ishmael's house, shepherd princes, men of flocks and spears, remembered in trade routes and in battles, remembered in Scripture as witnesses that God's promise to Ishmael was not void. Adbeel came next, whose name signifies disciplined of God. And I saw his descendants moving through the Sinai, merchants of spice and pottery, traders who knew the hidden paths of the desert. Mibsam, whose name means sweet odor or fragrance, seemed to me in vision as a people tied to incense, to the offerings carried upon caravans, and their role was to carry goods between nations, linking cultures with unseen threads of trade. Mishma followed, and his name means hearing, and I could not escape the resonance, for Ishmael means God will hear, and Mishma means hearing, as if to declare that God not only hears but causes his people to hear. And in Chronicles it is recorded that the Simeonites encountered Mishma's tribe, perhaps even mingling with them, so that Israel and Ishmael were interwoven at the edges. Then came Dumah, whose name means silence, and in vision I saw a city bearing his name, a stronghold in the desert, known to the Assyrians as Adumatu, called the fortress of the Arabs. In Isaiah, Dumah is mentioned again. Watchman, what of the night? And his people were seen as keepers of silence and of watchfulness, warriors who guarded gates in the sands. Massa was named next, his name meaning burden or oracle, and his people are linked in inscriptions to the desert south of Damascus, known for their prophecies and their oases. Hadad, whose name recalls the storm god of the Arameans, shows how tribes carried mixed influences, for Ishmael's line touched other peoples, absorbing and transforming. Tema followed, and his name means south or desert, and he is remembered as an oasis city, a place of refuge for caravans, where trade flourished and water sustained life. Then I beheld Jetur and Naphish, brothers often mentioned together, warriors in the Transjordan, archers who opposed Israel yet were also subdued by them, and their names mean defense and refreshed, showing their role as protectors and survivors. Finally came Kedemah, whose name means east, and in vision I saw that his people symbolized the spread of Ishmael's seed toward the rising sun, stretching into lands unknown, mingling with other tribes, carrying with them the spirit of their father. These 12 names are not dust. They are the living map of how God's promise to Ishmael unfolded, and each son became a tribe, each tribe became a people, and together they formed the framework of Ishmael's great nation. Some merged with Midianites, some warred with Israelites, some traded with Assyrians, some built cities and oases, but all bore witness that Abraham's firstborn did not vanish into exile, but multiplied into nations. What does this mean for you who listen now? It means that God's word does not fall to the ground. It means that even the outcast carries seed of destiny. It means that the 12 tribes of Ishmael, though less remembered than the 12 tribes of Israel, are no less real, no less marked, no less bound into the covenantal web of humanity. And in this you find a mirror, for when you think yourself overlooked, when you believe the promise has passed you by, remember Ishmael. Remember his sons. Remember that 12 princes rose from the one who was cast out, and their names endure as testimony that no soul is outside the hearing of God. This is what the Spirit gave me concerning the 12 sons, and in their story is the proof that the hand of Abraham stretches far wider than most have dared to see, and that Ishmael's blood, scattered as sand, still cries out across the ages, God will hear. The lands inhabited by the sons of Ishmael were not confined to a single valley or a narrow strip of earth. They spread wide and far, shaping the face of Arabia and touching the borders of empires. And in this spreading you can see the hand of destiny carving paths across the wilderness. From the deserts of Arabia to the edge of Africa, from the Sinai Peninsula to the Levant, the children of Ishmael established themselves as wanderers, shepherds, traders, and warriors, leaving marks that even the empires of Assyria and Babylon could not erase. Arabia became their heartland, vast and unforgiving, with its searing sands and rare oases. Yet to Ishmael's sons it was not only barren, it was life, for they mastered the art of survival where others saw only death. They roamed the peninsula that you call Saudi Arabia, stretching into Yemen and Oman, lifting their tents in Jordan and the Emirates, establishing a presence in the regions where caravans moved with incense, spices, and treasures that bound east and west. The Sinai became another dwelling place, a threshold between Egypt and Israel, where desert tribes guarded passages and watched empires march. The Levant, too, knew their footsteps. For in Jordan and Syria, the blood of Ishmael mingled with other Semitic peoples, shaping a population not of one root alone, but of many interwoven threads. In vision, I saw their reach extend even into North Africa, down into the regions of Sudan, a testimony to their migrations and their refusal to vanish. The way of life they carried was nomadic at its core, not bound by city walls or palaces of stone, but by tents, by flocks, by the ceaseless rhythm of desert winds. They moved with herds of camels, sheep, and goats, drinking from wells known only to them, traveling across sands guided by stars that seemed to answer the promise spoken over their father. Their strength was not in temples or in fortresses, but in mobility, in resilience, in the wisdom of adapting to a land that demanded endurance. Where Israel held covenant in the law and the temple, Ishmael's children held covenant in survival, in the silent agreement with the desert that life could be wrestled from sand if men were willing to endure. This difference of dwelling is also a difference of spirit. For while Isaac's line was rooted, Ishmael's line was scattered. While one built altars of stone, the other built fires in the night. While one guarded vineyards and fields, the other mastered caravans and horizons. In these lands, the tribes of Ishmael became known not only for their herds, but for their trade. For the desert itself became a highway of commerce. They carried frankincense and myrrh, gold and spices, perfumes and resins, across routes that reached from Arabia into Egypt, from Damascus to Mesopotamia. Their oases became centers of exchange, where merchants rested, where languages mingled, where cultures touched. The cities of Tema and Dumah were not merely villages, but nodes of life, strategic stations in the lifeblood of ancient trade. Even Assyrian records testify to the tribute they received from these tribes, for kings recognized their power, not in armies alone, but in control of the flow of goods across the desert. Yet the land was not only commerce, it was also a proving ground of spirit. The Arabian Peninsula, with its heat and scarcity, shaped a people both fierce and disciplined. The wilderness was their teacher, and its lessons were endurance, independence, and cunning. They learned to ride swiftly, to strike quickly, to vanish into the dunes, and empires that sought to subdue them often found themselves humbled by their mastery of the desert. They were not bound to a single capital or palace that could be conquered. Their kingdom was the shifting horizon itself. That is why their presence lasted, why their memory survived, for they carried a covenant of survival as much as a covenant of blood. In the Sinai, their tribes bridged worlds, acting as both threat and guide to those who passed between Egypt and Canaan. Their knowledge of hidden paths, of wells, of mountain passes made them indispensable and dangerous at once. In the Levant, their sons intermingled with other Semitic tribes, becoming part of the tapestry of peoples that included descendants of Esau, of Lot, of Midian, each branch a reminder that Abraham's blood flowed in many directions. The reach into North Africa further expanded their influence, showing that exile had not reduced them but multiplied them. This spread of Ishmael's children reveals something deeper than geography. It reveals the unfolding of God's word. For when he promised Abraham that Ishmael would father 12 princes and become a great nation, the proof was not only in bloodlines but in landscapes. Every stretch of desert that bore their tents, every oasis that carried their flocks, every caravan route marked by their presence, stood as a living fulfillment of that promise. Even when history books give more space to the kingdoms of Israel, the tribes of Ishmael were not erased. They lived in the margins, in the sands, in the trade routes, shaping history in ways less recorded but no less real. So when you look upon Arabia, upon Sinai, upon the Levant, upon North Africa, do not see only barren wasteland or forgotten tribes. See instead the living evidence of the covenant that God does not abandon the son of exile, that his hearing extends beyond the chosen line to the one cast into the wilderness. Ishmael's children made the desert their inheritance, and the desert kept their memory alive. This is the truth of their habitation. They did not vanish, they expanded, they endured, they carried into the world the proof that God's word to Abraham was not empty. The forgotten tribes of Ishmael carry within their names and their histories the proof that no promise spoken by the Eternal can be silenced. For each tribe bore a destiny, and though their memory has often been buried beneath dust and empire, their mark remains etched in the scriptures, in ancient inscriptions, and in the living traditions of nations. Nebaioth, the firstborn, was recognized by prophets and historians alike, his name meaning heights, and his tribe rising like pillars of shepherds. Isaiah speaks of the flocks of Nebaioth coming to the house of the Lord, and Josephus records that his people stretched from the Euphrates to the Red Sea, inhabiting regions that later became known as Nabatea. Their skill in breeding sheep and camels, their control of grazing lands, and their wealth in livestock made them central to desert life, and their presence is remembered not only in trade but in prophecy. Kedar, the second son, became equally renowned, his name linked with tents of black goat hair stretched across the desert, and the prophet Isaiah declares the glory of Kedar fading, while Jeremiah warns of their swift archers. Assyrian kings recorded battles with Kedar's tribes, noting their resistance and their commerce. These two, Nebaioth and Kedar, formed the strength of Ishmael's first lines, pillars of shepherding and warfare, shaping Arabia for centuries. Adbeel, whose name carries the meaning disciplined of God, appears less in scripture but more in historical speculation, for his people dwelt in the Sinai, engaging in commerce, pottery, and regional trade, connecting Egypt with Arabian lands. Mibsam, meaning fragrance, is remembered as a people linked to incense and aromatic goods, their role as carriers of perfumes and resins, marking them as essential to the caravan economy. Their name itself suggests offerings and sweetness, showing that even through trade, the tribes bore symbolic meaning, carrying the scent of blessing across the desert. Mishma, whose name means hearing, reflects the echo of his father's name Ishmael, God will hear, and Chronicles records that his tribe intermingled with Simeon's descendants, showing how Ishmael's blood touched Israel's line, weaving into its story despite exile. This mingling is no accident, for the Spirit shows that exile does not always mean separation, and even those cast aside can return in hidden ways, reshaping the destiny of nations. Dumah, meaning silence, is remembered as a fortress in the desert, a city called Adumatu in Assyrian texts, a stronghold of the Arabs, mentioned in Isaiah's cryptic prophecy. Watchman, what of the night? His people stood as guardians of silence and of watchfulness, defenders of desert gates. Massa, meaning burden or oracle, appears in inscriptions that link him to the tribes south of Damascus, a people tied to prophecy and to oases. His name suggests weight and responsibility, and indeed his tribe is recorded as bringing tribute to Assyria, showing both subjugation and resilience. Hadad bears the name of the Aramean storm god, suggesting influence and intermingling, his tribe inhabiting lands near Palmyra, shaping interactions with Syria and Mesopotamia. Tema is remembered as an oasis city, a place mentioned in Job, a station of caravans, where travelers found water and rest, and Assyrian records confirm its tribute, marking it as a hub of desert trade. The people of Tema did not vanish, for their oasis became one of the arteries of commerce in Arabia, linking north and south, east and west. Jetur, Naphish, and Kedemah are recorded together, tribes dwelling in the Transjordan, skilled in archery, warriors who opposed Israel but were subdued by them yet not destroyed. Chronicles records their defeat and capture by the Reubenites, but history shows their survival, their persistence, their interweaving with Hagarenes and Kenites. Jetur means defense, Naphish means refreshed, Kedemah means east, and together their names reveal their role as protectors, survivors, and expanders, stretching Ishmael's line eastward beyond the Jordan into lands that touched the rising Sunday. These tribes were not isolated. They interacted constantly with other Semitic peoples. The Midianites, sons of Abraham by Keturah, are found in close connection with Ishmaelites, often mentioned side by side in genealogies and in narratives. The Hagarenes, descendants of Hagar, appear intertwined with Ishmael's tribes. Edomites, Moabites, and Amalekites all touched their borders, fought their battles, traded their goods. This intermingling shaped the Middle East into a web of bloodlines, each carrying echoes of Abraham, each bearing pieces of his covenant. The forgotten tribes remind us that history is not linear but interwoven, that identity is not fixed but mingled, that the destiny of Ishmael did not end in a desert exile but spread through countless crossings. Archaeology confirms what Scripture suggests. Assyrian inscriptions list Kedar, Nebaioth, Tema, and Massa as tributary tribes, naming their kings, recording their resistance. Graffiti texts in Arabian deserts mention tribes of Ishmael. Ancient records describe their role as merchants, their tribute of spices, camels, and livestock. Even Flavius Josephus, writing in the 1st century, identified Arab peoples of his day with Nebaioth and Kedar. These are not inventions of myth. They are historical realities, tribes that carried Abraham's blood into the living desert. Their traces endure in names, in languages, in ruins, in traditions. The meaning of their survival is sharper than history. These tribes show that Ishmael's promise was fulfilled. 12 princes were named, 12 tribes arose, each with its place, each with its meaning. They were warriors and merchants, shepherds and nomads, prophets and traders. Their lives reveal that God's hearing does not end with exile, that his promise extends into the wilderness. Israel had its 12 tribes and its law. Ishmael had his 12 tribes and his desert, and together they mirror one another, chosen and cast out, rooted and wandering, temple and tent, law and survival. The forgotten tribes show that the covenant of Abraham was not confined but multiplied, that 2 lines carried it, and both stand as testimony. The world remembers Israel more, for Israel's story filled the scriptures and shaped Western faith. But Ishmael's tribes whisper from the desert, calling you to remember that no promise is lost, that no son is unseen. Their names echo still, and their survival through centuries proves the depth of God's faithfulness. The forgotten tribes of Ishmael are not forgotten in heaven, and their legacy remains a mirror of exile, survival, and promise fulfilled. This is the 6th part of the mystery, that in each tribe you see a fragment of prophecy, and in their endurance you see the eternal word proven true. The spiritual meaning of Ishmael's line is sharper than any record of geography or genealogy, for within his story is contained the truth that exile does not erase destiny and rejection does not silence the voice of God. And it is this paradox that speaks most clearly to the heart of mankind. If Isaac's tribes stand for covenant, law, and the order of chosen people, Ishmael's tribes stand for survival, endurance, and the blessing given to those who are cast out yet still heard. Ishmael is not a mistake. He is a mirror, showing that the eternal listens not only to the celebrated but to the despised, not only to the settled but to the wanderer. His very name, God will hear, is prophecy, and his 12 sons are living evidence that heaven's word does not fail. The spiritual lesson is that no man, no nation, no soul is invisible to God, even when men have turned their faces away. To understand this is to grasp why the story of Ishmael remains alive across 3 great faiths, why Judaism cannot deny his place as Abraham's son, why Christianity must acknowledge him as witness to divine mercy, and why Islam exalts him as ancestor of the Prophet and builder of the Kaaba. Each tradition, though divided in doctrine, preserves a piece of the same truth, that God hears beyond boundaries, that his promises stretch wider than human favoritism. Ishmael's story exposes the human tendency to create divisions, to measure worth by lineage, by inheritance, by the law of the household. Sarah demanded that he be sent away, not because he was unworthy, but because she feared rivalry. She feared that Isaac's inheritance might be shared. But the Eternal declared otherwise, that Ishmael too would become a great nation, for he also carried Abraham's blood. The spiritual meaning here is fierce. Human fear divides. Divine promise multiplies. Where man sees threat, God sees potential. Where man casts out, God raises up. Thus, Ishmael's line is testimony that rejection by men is not rejection by God, and that the wilderness itself can become a womb for nations. This truth should pierce the conscience of every reader, for it reveals that no exile in your own life is wasted, that the times you have been abandoned may yet become the ground of your greatest multiplication, that your deserts may conceal hidden wells, waiting to be revealed when you lift up your eyes. The prophets remembered Ishmael not only as a figure of history, but as a symbol of nations. Isaiah spoke of Nebaioth and Kedar bringing offerings. Jeremiah spoke of Kedar's tents and archers. The chroniclers recorded the mingling of Mishma's tribe with Israel. And in every mention there is a reminder that the son of exile cannot be erased. Even in silence, Ishmael's line speaks. For Dumah means silence, and yet his people stood as guardians of the night. Even in fragrance, his line speaks. For Mibsam means perfume, and his people carried incense across deserts. Even in burden, his line speaks. For Massa means oracle, and his people bore the weight of prophecy. Each name, each tribe is a sign that Ishmael's destiny was not forgotten, that his line bore meaning as much as Israel's, though different in form. The spiritual contrast between Isaac and Ishmael is not contradiction but complement. Isaac represents covenant law. Ishmael represents covenant survival. Isaac is rooted in the land of promise. Ishmael roams in the wilderness of expansion. Isaac builds temple. Ishmael raises tents. Isaac guards inheritance through lineage. Ishmael creates inheritance through endurance. Both reveal the character of God, who is not limited to one mode of blessing, but who blesses in paradox. To deny Ishmael's role is to deny the fullness of the divine plan, for God's hearing extends beyond chosen walls. His blessing runs through both temple and desert. His covenant is wider than human vision. This is why Ishmael is a mirror, and why his descendants stand as witnesses that the cast out may yet be chosen in another way. In the visions I was shown, the sons of Ishmael were scattered across Arabia, building no single throne but many camps. And the Spirit spoke that this scattering is itself part of the meaning, for sometimes destiny is not concentration but expansion. Israel's tribes formed a nation of law and temple. Ishmael's tribes formed a network of trade and survival. One line carried the written word, the other carried the unbroken spirit. And even now you see the fruit of both, for the world is shaped by the covenant of Israel and by the survival of Ishmael. Their rivalry became the rivalry of faiths. Their division became the division of nations. Yet their unity remains in the Father they share, Abraham, who loved them both. The spiritual meaning is that humanity must learn to see through the rivalry to the shared origin. For peace cannot be born until the world admits that Isaac and Ishmael are brothers. Your own life is also reflected here, for Ishmael symbolizes the part of you that has been rejected, cast aside, forced into desert places, and yet preserved by unseen wells. When you feel unseen, when you believe the promise is for others and not for you, remember Ishmael, for God hears. His 12 princes prove that the rejected may yet multiply, that what seems exile may yet be the path of greatness. This is not sentiment, it is the hard truth of history and spirit alike, for entire nations grew from the boy placed under a bush to die. The lesson is fierce and unbending. Do not despise your wilderness, for God may be shaping there the foundation of tribes you cannot yet imagine. Thus, the 7th part of this mystery is revealed. Ishmael's line carries the spiritual meaning of survival: blessed, exile, redeemed, rejection, transformed. The names of his tribes are not only markers of people, but symbols of truths, that God hears the afflicted, that his promises multiply even in deserts, that his blessings are not confined to one inheritance. The cast out is still seen, the outcast is still blessed, the forgotten is still remembered. Ishmael's descendants are more than tribes of history. They are living testimonies that divine promise stretches beyond human choice. that exile itself can become the stage of destiny, that God's hearing is the foundation of all survival. When I draw together all that has been shown, I feel the weight of Ishmael's story resting not only in the sands of Arabia, but in the depths of every human soul. For his life and the lives of his 12 sons are more than history. They are mirrors in which we see ourselves, and their echo continues to shape the world. I have spoken of Isaac and I have spoken of Ishmael, 2 brothers born of one father, 2 streams flowing from one spring, and I know now that neither stream was wasted, neither line was abandoned, for the Eternal shaped both to carry forward his design. I look back into the visions and I see Abraham torn between the laughter of Isaac and the cry of Ishmael, and I know that such division is not only his, it is ours. For each of us is divided between the child of promise and the child of exile within. In Isaac we see the order of covenant, in Ishmael the endurance of the wilderness, and both are alive in us. Both are voices within the human heart. Ishmael's name, God will hear, lingers with me as more than a title. It is a truth carved into the fabric of existence. God heard the boy crying under the bush. God heard the cry of Hagar when she believed she was unseen. And God hears still the cry of every outcast, every wanderer, every soul that believes itself abandoned. To remember Ishmael is to remember that the hearing of God is not limited to temples or chosen altars. It stretches into deserts, into tents, into silence. This is the deep residue of the story, that no matter how far you are driven, you are still within the sound of heaven's ear. When I reflect on the 12 sons, on their names and their tribes, I do not see forgotten genealogies. I see lessons written in the language of nations. Nebaioth speaks of heights, reminding us that destiny often rises beyond what men expect. Kedar speaks of shadow, teaching us that glory fades, but endurance remains. Mibsam speaks of fragrance, teaching that even in desert sweetness can be carried. Dumah speaks of silence, showing that sometimes the watchman's role is to wait through the night. Tema speaks of the oasis, reminding that even in barren lands there is refuge. Each name is both history and prophecy, both record and symbol. And when I hold them together, I see that Ishmael's line was blessed to scatter truths across lands and generations. The deeper recognition that forms in me is that the covenant of Abraham was never narrow. Men read the record and cling to one son, one line, one chosen inheritance. But the Eternal multiplied it, and in so doing revealed that his blessing is larger than men's boundaries. Isaac was chosen for the law, Ishmael was chosen for survival, Isaac for temple, Ishmael for desert, Isaac for rooted covenant, Ishmael for wandering endurance. Both reveal the character of the Creator, who blesses not only what is settled but what is scattered, not only what is included but what is excluded. This is the resonance that remains, that no man can claim monopoly on divine promise, for God hears the cries that men ignore. I confess that when I first began to see Ishmael's line, I thought of him as lesser, as secondary, as shadow to Isaac's light. But the more I looked, the more I understood that shadow is not absence of light, it is its companion. Ishmael's story is not a tale of failure, but of paradox fulfilled, not curse, but blessing of a different order. And as I see the present world, divided by faith, torn by rivalry of nations that trace themselves back to these brothers, I know that peace will not come until both are remembered together. To exalt Isaac without Ishmael is to cripple Abraham's covenant. To exalt Ishmael without Isaac is to deny the line of promise. Both must be held, both must be honored, both must be reconciled. So the lingering note is not of history alone, but of conscience. Each of you carries Ishmael within. Each of you has tasted exile. Each of you has felt rejection. Each of you has cried in the wilderness, believing yourself unseen. Let the remembrance of Ishmael teach you that God hears, that no voice is too far, no soul too lost, no desert too empty. And let the remembrance of Isaac remind you that covenant still binds, that order and law still matter, that inheritance is not erased. Together they form the whole. Together they heal the divided heart. This is the conclusion pressed upon me. The story of Ishmael and his 12 tribes is not simply about ancient Arabia. It is about the human condition. It is about the paradox of being both chosen and cast out, of being both remembered and forgotten, of being both rival and brother. It is about the truth that God's promises are never broken, though men may misunderstand them. And as I release these words, I feel the echo settle, not as noise, but as deep silence, like Dumah's name, a silence heavy with hearing. For in the end, the lesson is simple and fierce, God will hear. He heard Ishmael. He hears you, and that hearing is the ground of hope that will never fade.